All right, so let's come to our panel discussion, our industry insights about security for digital transformation. As you can see, we have all our panel speakers ready. And so the panel is like this. So I will give like a minute, like 2 minutes for our panel speakers to do a self-introduction about themselves. Although I did the official introduction, but I just want to hear their their story. Then after that, I will walk through some panel questions. So we personally, I feel very interested. And we also had a lot of questions already submitted by people during the presentation, Catherine and Bryan's presentation. We will try to incorporate those questions into the panel as well. All right, so let's start. Since Bryan and Catherine already talked, so I will let Ryan speak first. So Ryan, can you, we have a Bryan, Ryan, and another Bryan. We try to differentiate a little bit here. So Ryan from Miles. So Ryan, can you quickly introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Bryan. So I'm Ryan. I lead the security team at Air Miles Loyalty One. I've been with the company for about 4 years. Prior to that, I had a brief stint at KPMG in consulting. And then prior to that, I spent some time in the finance industry before I discovered my love of security and kind of dove headfirst into that world. Yeah, super excited to discuss the panel.
Excellent. And as you know, Air Miles loyalty programs, so those are the leading, if you talk about digitalized, right? So that's actually the leading program. So we can definitely hear the insights from Ryan from there. Catherine, share a little bit different things from you besides the official thing.
Certainly, thank you so much. Great to be on the panel as well. Very, very appreciative of being included. Yeah, so from my background, as I mentioned earlier, you know, the one thing I maybe didn't mention is I have spent time at Deloitte as director in their cyber risk services out in the West, dealt with a number of clients over the years, helping them, whether it be on security strategy, security maturity assessments, et cetera, all the way through to deployment of larger capabilities and transforming their cybersecurity capabilities, as well as outsourcing, supporting all of those programs and looking at how we could support our clients. Prior to that, though, and I think it's an important thing as we talk about evolving as a team within cyber in the profession. As an advocate for that, I actually spent 25 years as a dental hygienist. Prior to moving into IT and moving into cybersecurity. And that I know that that's a big leap for a lot of individuals. It's a big leap for myself, and I actually went through the journey. And but again, really thankful to be able to have had a really engaging career as my first profession and take all of the pieces that I learned from that profession forward, you know, from a risk-based decision-making, actions, et cetera, all the way through to supporting customers, whether your customer is a single individual or a large financial institution. They have systems, they have risks, they have things that they need to have addressed. And again, really happy to be here and help to share my insights and perhaps different perspectives.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Catherine. Bryan, anything you want to kind of share some story about yourself?
Well, I was going to say that I've done a really diverse type of things over my career, but Catherine sort of stole my thunder on that one. I was talking about working on help desk and, you know, and rack mounting computers and things, not being a dental hygienist. So I'm crossing that off my notes. But I have done a lot of different things in the IT realm over the years. I don't know if you can see the gray in my beard, but yes, I've been doing this for a long time. And I have worked on a help desk. I have worked as a LAN administrator, an implementer, at an integrator. I've installed firewalls. I've installed intrusion detection things. I've installed pretty much everything under the sun. Eventually, you know, about probably 10, 12 years ago now, I started focusing on identity, first as an implementer and then as a consultant in the role that I'm in now. So like Catherine, but on a much lesser scale, I think it's good to have some perspective on some of these security issues. So whenever I talk security, I always try and view it through through the customer's eyes, or if I'm addressing, IT folks through their eyes, because not everybody wakes up in the morning and is obsessed with security, and that's their number one goal. People are actually, interested in other things like doing their job, other IT jobs, or making money as a corporation, those types of things. So can never lose sight of other people's perspectives, in my opinion.
Excellent. And if you notice why we need to ask those kind of like personal questions at the beginning of the panel, sounds like it's not directly related to the topic, but we always have those questions. Really, because I think for you, audience, like the people online, you join tonight's session, you probably have two purposes. One is for your professional development. You learn insights, skills, knowledge. On the other side, probably for your personal development. And our speakers, they are the established leaders, experts in the industry. From their personal journey, you can also, if you're thinking about move to the next level or like have a career advancement, so those are the insights you can learn from them. So that's the importance to learn their journey and what they have done before. So that's a purpose. We kind of talk a little bit on there. All right, back to the business. Digital transformation. And cybersecurity become right now is a very hot topic, right? So especially for digital transformation, COVID-19 also changed the landscape a lot. So speaking of that, we have a lot of why do we need security in the first place for the digital transformation? Sounds like a common sense, but really is what are some like significant cyber threats? If we didn't do it, we won't have the good, like a successful digital transformation. So in your mind, there are so many cyber risks, right? So, but in your mind, what are some like a top cyber threats in your practice or in your business you observe? Probably you can, considering the time, you probably can just talk one obvious, like one significant one in your practice. All right, so who wants? Ryan, probably you first.
No, that sounds good. Yeah, so digital transformation is near and dear to my heart. We're going through it at Air Miles, so this is a perfect topic. And Bryan and Catherine alluded to this in their presentations, but and it was accelerated with us working from home. But the traditional way of working and securing our IT assets is changing, and it's changing at a rapid pace. And then setting up not so much controls, but monitoring the controls and how we provision things to support that is changing as well. And with that change comes the need for new skills, new technologies, new processes to manage that risk. And sometimes that change is extremely fast and you can't catch it, or the skills just aren't there to manage that. So sometimes it's a bit of that cat and mouse game of like, okay, we want to go fast, and then sometimes security and the controls follow, and that's probably one of the biggest threats outside of like obviously like nation state attacks and all of those like heavy technical ones that we face on a day-to-day, especially as we go more towards not on-prem and leveraging a lot of these other technologies.
All right. So how to work with the process, the tools, and a lot of also related to communication and the way people are working together.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. And anyone else want to add on?
I can add to Ryan's point. I think the one of the biggest risks that we see, when we'll talk about cloud environments, for example, the pace of change and the lack of training, availability of skilled staff, really makes the sort of threat of misconfiguration and poor change management top of mind, especially in like a really dynamic environment like cloud. It's new skills, new way of doing things. And, to Ryan's point, sometimes things do get missed. And in terms of technology, how that might manifest itself is, things getting missed in those types of environments. So I do see, the threats are, as Ryan said, nation states and, other traditional threats. But in terms of the risks, we do see a lot of organizations that really struggle with just doing the types of configurations that they were able to do in their older environments, but just the pace of change of digital transformation is putting them out of their comfort zone, and they're configuring things at a rate of change that they're not used to. And sometimes security suffers in that respect, Bryan.
All right, cool. Catherine, anything you want to add on?
Yeah, absolutely. And really, just in addition to both what Bryan and Ryan have noted, and I think on that pace of change, it's even a concern from just learning. Like there are threats that we face and risks that we face because it's hard to keep up. And by being hard to keep up, whether or not it's something that we're supposed to be actioning, that's one piece, but it's another piece to even stay focused and keeping up with your business as to where they're trying to drive, then understanding how we can partner with them to bring the security along the journey. And I think when we have those risks, to your point, I think Ryan had mentioned it earlier, the entire process backs up, or we're no longer invited to the game because we're seen to be I think Bryan noted the road bump along the journey. And so I think from a risk perspective or a threats perspective, it's absolutely being able to keep up and keeping our people awake and alert and trained. The other piece is to think like a hacker. I think there's a lot of, this is a big business, whether it be nation state or not, it's big business and they think differently. And I think probably one of the biggest things I would say is that in order to help address that risk, we have to start shifting left. It's a common term, phrase that in order to shift left, you're pushing it further down into the prevent perspective, making sure that we're doing all of those things to be more secure. And because we just can't keep pace with being reactive, we need to be more proactive. And that's a hard thing to do, in particular in the last 14 months.
Excellent. All right. Let's move on to the next question. I think when Catherine presented, she emphasized a lot on the program, right? So if we consider the digital transformation as a big program, right? So we work on that. There's multiple projects. There's all kind of task things. So once come to the program, we as a classic project management, there are a lot of challenges, right? So what are some common challenges when you implement digital transformation or something you try to implement a security program into those digital transformation? What are some common challenges you observe? I heard some of already training, a talent. What are other major challenges you experienced?
Well, I can go first, I suppose. The kind of at a higher level, you might say that digital transformation initiatives challenge organizations to change their mindset in a lot of ways. So traditional roles that people have been doing for years and years might be changing with this transformation. So that's kind of the macro view, is getting people to rethink their roles or change their roles is one of the real challenges that people face. And that's not necessarily a technology challenge, and it's not necessarily a security challenge, but how that can manifest itself, to give you some sort of real world examples, is now you've got a CI/CD pipeline, so you've got developers that are potentially deploying infrastructure, and initially that might have been quite shocking, but now we've all sort of kind of got our head around that, and it's more important to accept that and move on to how we can do that securely and with change management and everything else. I think in the early days of cloud, it might have even been shocking that cloud could scale on its own. This is going back now, but the fact that you might go to sleep and wake up and one web server's become 100 web servers because your website took off, that's a good thing. But I can remember back in those days, people trying to get their heads around infrastructure deploying itself. So changing the mindset of people to keep pace with, as Catherine just said, that this rapid pace of new things that are coming, getting the people to change their mindset is a real challenge, Bryan.
Excellent. The mindset, the paradigm, right? So the paradigm, the way to look at things, and especially the change to the things you get so used to. So that's the typical challenge we will see. All right. Ryan, what do you see any challenge there?
So it's funny because I feel like we have this conversation as a team on a weekly basis, but tying exactly what you're doing to a business need or to like a need outside of security, right? So, you might walk into an organization where security is truly a roadblock. They're always reactionary. They're always there when something either is about to go bad or has gone bad. And to deploy a successful security program, you have to get ahead of that, and you have to build. So you have to obviously have good technical foundation, but you have to build relationships with senior leaders so that you are moving with them. So you're not one step behind. You can have these conversations with senior leaders to say, okay, where's the business going? And if the focus is ad tech and martech, for example, cool. Like we can help you secure the ad tech and martech stack. But if there's none of that communication, you're going to be focusing on potentially the wrong areas, spending money in the wrong areas, and then you're going to find out in a month or 2 months that, hey, we've deployed something over there, no one's looked at it, we thought we were okay, and it starts to fuel this like snowball of security comes in at the wrong time and all these fun things. So having that open communication, and it might be like the hardest part of this whole thing is going to be communication, and planning. Everything else will take, it'll start to roll once you have like that first piece nailed down. And apart from going through it myself, it's really hard to understand that because you think like everybody should understand security, everybody should get it. But like as everybody else has mentioned, they're worried about delivering their actual job and delivering value or making money. And we come in at that 11th hour and be like, hey, did you think of that one thing? And they're like, oh my God, no, I didn't. So trying to prevent any of those surprises is critical for not only digital transformation, but just good relationships and developing the program.
Perfect. And the relationship management, communications, and also back to Catherine's point, the stakeholder management, right? So those are very, very important because if you don't have your boss or your partners, like your sponsors, right? So if you don't have their support, your program won't get us go too far away. Excellent. And Catherine, anything you want to share?
No, well, I know that earlier I did share a number of different challenges, and I think that both Bryan and Ryan have really noted other, absolutely, there's no end to the litany or the list of potential challenges, and I think probably the most important one that I would see is that alignment right from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And I think Ryan was just mentioning communication, planning. Quite often they say, spend the majority of your time in the planning, get your ducks in a row, get things organized. You'll always have to shift, but quite often we get so excited to roll things out and to start moving that we don't have a plan, and we haven't thought of the dependencies, and we don't understand why do we need a contingency fund. And it could be a small project. I'm talking about, we're going to deploy one new capability. It's not a project or one piece of a larger program. If we don't have those pieces together and we don't have someone who can actually manage to that plan, you could have a team of 2 people, but you still need to manage that plan and communicate and report metrics, etc. I think planning is probably the number, just getting everything straight from the beginning and getting your sponsors to understand what you're going to achieve according to that plan. It really, it certainly is complicated and not simple, even if it's a one-man project, one-person project.
Right. You need to have sounds like you need to have someone champion that, right? So you need to have someone oversee what's going on, may not be at every detail level, but at least at a high level, what's going on the different track. That's back to the program management as well.
Absolutely. Even if you don't have a program, to your point, having a trusted colleague, a good work friend or a work colleague or your sponsor,
Right.
To help those discussions, because we always miss something, and to have someone challenge us and be having our back, but being able to say, I think you've missed this point, or have you covered this, certainly goes a long ways as well.
Right. So that's also what Ryan mentioned. Because why we need the relationship management, really build that trust, right? So when you trust us, the team will do the work, your partner will do the work, other team do. So it's a lot of things will become easier. Otherwise, there's a lot of unnecessary talks, right? So around that landscape. And one thing I also want to see your point really is from the people submitted the question. I think several people submitted that question during the presentation and also here. It's money, right? So one of the challenge besides the process, people, technology is the budget. Because if you don't have that budget, you're limited, right? So what's the right amount budget? How do you kind of manage that budget? How do you allocate the budget? So, and also how do you avoid some like unnecessary cost, like Bryan mentioned, like locking, or like some people like abuse the privilege to kind of so how do you manage the budget for this? So what's your insights on that?
Well, from a total cost of ownership, I think the one question that had been posted earlier was really about how do you, when you're just starting, how do you know what it would be? And quite often what you would see in a lot of these scenarios is that you would have different either gating or phases. So as you're envisioning or in the design portion, you're going to be maybe plus or minus 50% in your estimate of what you think. You're just really pulling the information together. The one thing you probably would have more confidence in is what is it costing us today? If it's a replacement tool, for instance, you have a particular PAM technology and you're looking to replace that PAM technology, or a SIM technology and you're replacing that SIM solution, you would probably be able to have a better understanding of what your current costs are. And the people cost, that's the harder part I find, is that the actual people costs related to the technology costs. But pulling that information as part of your current state and then being able to estimate when you're moving forward, it's kind of a sliding grid of, as you get closer into the understanding your actual requirements, functional, non-functional, what you expect, and you're starting to look at different solutions that help to map to that. That's one of the ways of getting a little bit better idea of what that total cost of ownership is going to be. The other piece is, I think what we often see get missed is anything around contingency. So, building your plan and true contingency planning. And I've had lots of different opportunities where people say, oh, we've got our slush bucket or the extra funds sitting here. And true contingency is building that plan, looking at the plan and identifying the risks. So where are your greatest risks to, let's say, a change ticket is going to go late, or you're waiting for a certain licensing to get purchased, and it goes through procurement and that takes time. What is the amount of delay you expect? What is the potential cost related to that? And setting that aside as part of your contingency fund, and then setting triggers. So if it's a long program, you might be looking at this on a monthly or quarterly basis. Shorter projects or initiatives, you might have a quicker turnaround, but you then be assessing and say, hey, listen, that risk is actually not coming true. We've actually hit that milestone. We're now going to give that funding back. And what I have seen, Bryan, is when you're asking for funding, it often seems like we're always asking for more. It's a really great opportunity when you can have that mapping back to the contingency and being able to share with your sponsor, with your senior leaders, et cetera, that we actually managed our risk of delivering this initiative, and we're able to give you money back in a timely fashion. So it can be redeployed elsewhere. And that goes a long ways to winning further support, winning trust and confidence from other leaders.
Excellent. Very good insight. So you need to have some baseline first, and also have some like a contingency reserve. And also very important is to bring that visibility to the management and to let them know we are following some structured way of doing things, just not like we're randomly like spend money, right?
It's a good point, Bryan, because I often see, like, we are security professionals, we're facing cyber security risks, but we actually have other risks that we need, and it's wearing that risk hat and thinking about the actual risk to developing and leading and deploying the solution, and all of those pieces in between.
Excellent. All right, Ryan, Bryan, any other input you want to add to this one related to cost or budget?
Well, that was really well said. I don't really have anything to add to that other than to say I'm kind of living it. I was almost taking notes as Catherine was talking there. I'm living it with a customer right now, and exactly what Catherine said was taking place. They have I think I can say they have an IAM program that they're replacing, and they have a PAM program that they're starting. So their IAM program, they have a lot of historical data on how much that's going to cost, and the costing is fairly accurate, we hope. The PAM program, they're starting from scratch. No, nothing is in place now, and that is more of an iterative process. To put it politely, we're coming up with our initial estimates. We're going through to take a closer look at the costs. So I think that's what your listeners are going to find, Bryan, is there's much more accuracy initially for programs that actually exist. And to one of Catherine's other points, we have found a lot of success in mapping out, potential contingency. So starting to set the stage for risk-based, this could go wrong, and if it does, and this could also be a risk to the project from a costing perspective. So we all know that it's difficult to predict some costs when a program doesn't even exist at all today, but putting some parameters around what potentially could happen to your estimate is something that management deserves to see.
Very good insight. Ryan, anything you want to add on to that?
Maybe just to add a little bit of personal experience, what I guess Bryan's living it now, we live it when we ask every, finance quarter for money, and we're like, please, a little bit more. I know we said we didn't need it, but we do. But tying it back to like the actual reason that you're going to use that money, and then tying it to like the organization's risk appetite, because there's always bleeding edge, really expensive, shiny things that you can purchase from a variety of vendors that tremendous value, but if it doesn't align with that, like your risk appetite and your tolerance, you're probably overscoping it. So it's really hard to show the return on that investment from a security perspective, from a time savings, or whatever the case might be. And that's where you start to get into a lot of trouble. We've had tons of projects that, sometimes the initial scope was X, and now you're slow, like as you go through discovery, it changes. And you need to be okay to explain that and just say, based on all the information we had, it was this. As we went through this, it slightly changed based on the information. And being able to articulate that helps support, hey, I need a little bit more money, or no, we're on budget, we're okay. It's more, again, it goes back to that surprise. When you haven't thought of something, it makes for awkward conversations for sure.
Very cool. And so I actually want to add one more thing here. Really is you all covered that one. So the biggest one of the larger costs is not just from the technology license fees or this annual renewal, really also from the human resource, right? So the people work on that one, and this is really the art, because oftentimes from my previous practice as well, we feels like we spend a lot of money on single person expertise, but if in fact, if we really play that well, that money is a really good investment. That would be good. Although if you just talk about, let's say we hire Bryan Reed as our consultant. So obviously with his expertise, he's expensive. But if we have him, but to actually save a lot of costs, we will avoid a lot of obstacles or the mistakes along the road if we don't have the expertise or the people done that before, right? So those are the costs you need to consider. The expertise, sometimes I feel the good architecture is really important to wire the things, to tell you the things beforehand, right? So that's a critical part as well. So it feels like don't hesitate to pay money for the expertise, but that's really important in upfront. Okay, let's move on. Automation is another key terms I heard often and often. why we need a digital transformation, a lot of times really is automate the process rather than rely on human manual process to do it. But it also means the big risk, because if automated, then if there's any error or mistake or breach, it will 10 times, 100 times, like thousands times, millions of times bad, right? So worse than if just a human do it. So how can we ensure kind of avoid those common mistakes during the automation? So for example, in identity field, Bryan mentioned, right? So not only we need to deal with the identity management with people, but also the identity management with application devices. So those are machines, right? So how do you manage balance the risk and security and automation? What's your insight on that?
I can take a first run at that. Unless
Sure, yeah.
my audio is not working. No, we're good. Cool.
You're good.
On the automation side, there needs to be, so there's two things, at least relevant to Air Miles and Loyalty One. So we are a data company at our heart. So we use automation for analytics. There's obviously some aspects there from dealing with people's data, what is legal and what is not, that needs to be taken into account, because you're essentially doing automated decision making to provide a service. And there are definite rules and legislation around how you can do that and how you let people know that. So obviously you need to play within the rules of data. On the security side, or just in general, automation in theory is great. If it's configured poorly or that something downstream doesn't work, it's going to, as you said, it's going to cause a lot of issues. So testing is crucial. You won't know until you try and test those things. You won't know until you make the mistake in testing and insert before you roll into production. Where you're going to fall down though is if, like, hey, we have automation, turn it on in production because the vendor told us it's going to work, and we hadn't really thought about all the requirements of why we're actually doing this. So automation for the sake of automation is a pretty dangerous game. It needs to be, again, tied back to, like, what's the value? What are we trying to accomplish here? Is it money well spent in this area, or should we focus on another spot?
Okay, very good. Very good.
Actually on the team
the monitoring for the automation. Catherine, you want to add anything there?
Certainly, I completely agree with Ryan. It's all in the approach, and I think based on what Ryan was mentioning as well, is it kind of ties into that privacy by design, security by design, and that automation is part of that. Back as well, the testing pieces that he spoke about. I think a lot of solutions too today, what we're seeing is more around audit mode. We can configure everything, and we can show all these things that we would like to have automated as rules and policies in place. But most people are quite nervous about, and we're talking C-suite is nervous about shutting down the business. They're all in for automation and leveraging it, but they are worried about the impact of the business. And that's where I have seen a lot of opportunities for, if there's an audit mode, in addition to the testing that Ryan mentioned and regression testing of how you're going to back things out, audit mode is another mitigating factor to help us get more confidence to turn things on as we move forward, whether it be just even, privacy, security, or just the user availability. If we think of the CIA triad, if they're secure, but there's no available services, then we need to certainly look at how we've configured those pieces.
Okay. So bake the security and privacy design in as early as possible.
Yes.
And to kind of, you mentioned another term, shift to left, right? So the more related to that as well.
Yes, exactly.
Bryan, what do you suggest?
Yeah, I love talking about automation. But I do have a scary story that I was going to tell in my presentation. I don't love scary stories because everybody's got 100 of them, but it's a quick one. Essentially, just to highlight the problems with automation, Palo Alto. This is a Palo Alto story. It's not me personally. If you're interested in this story to gather evidence on automation, by the way, for the listeners, Google Unit 42, misconfigured AWS roles. Unit 42 is a group of red teamers at Palo Alto. Long story short, they were working with a customer. They discovered a misconfigured AWS role. Very, very easy to do. There's lots of roles in AWS, and this was just one. They put an asterisk, because they thought that would work, basically a wild card. That's an issue for sure. But because they were using, security policy as code essentially, and automation, that role was replicated throughout the whole organization. And this was a service provider, so they had, multiple AWS tenants and so on and so on. So scariest story you could possibly imagine. I guess the happy ending of that is that, the pen testers discovered it before the bad people did. But it kind of highlights the testing aspect. This wasn't a robotic process or anything. This was, security as code. But the fact remains, in this case, you should have had like a pen tester or an internal testing team go over that, because the implementer made the mistake in production and automation made that mistake 1,000 times worse. So again, testing from my perspective as an implementer is really critical if you're going to move forward with automation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, yeah, so that's a perfect example of how bad it can go, right? So especially leverage the power of cloud and all those DevOps process, so you can replicate it like across the huge landscape. And speaking of automation or digital transformation or security in general, one of the major challenges really, if we design everything from scratch, let's say tomorrow we redesign, rebuild, may not be that difficult because everything new. But we, especially for a large organization, we have to inherit what we have right now, right? So especially for all those legacy system, we don't call it legacy, really. It's the things we're using, right? And many of them may be on-premise or maybe like been there for many years. People get so used to. So that's one of the challenge. So it's not like we're dealing things tomorrow with everything new. It's really, we have to gradually transit to the old one to the new one, move from the old way of doing things to the new way of doing things. So what's your insight about how to make that change smoothly? Catherine, I know from your management, you're probably dealing with a lot of those things.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. That is, it is interesting. I think so many people would be so envious to be able to wake up tomorrow and have a brand new organization that they could help shape.
Cloud nature, right? Native cloud company.
Absolutely, especially after COVID. We've gone through this remote workforce, you kind of know what you're moving towards. But given the fact that most organizations have some sort of legacy systems and environment, the thing I think is most important is understanding, and where you are today, the vision of where you want to go, and the parameters. Like if zero trust and the identity-centric view of zero trust, understanding microsegmentation, understanding what you're going to build future forward, taking those pieces and having a good concept of what those requirements are for new solutions as they come on is going to be absolutely paramount. But in addition to that, for those legacy systems, there has to be a way that you can gather which applications or systems would we now fit into a bundle, let's say bundle A. And bundle A would be ones that they're ready, they're modern enough that we could shift them we could move them to the cloud. We could have them be part of that new modern vision. And what are the steps that we would take? Is it, $100,000, to $150,000, how many man hours, and shape it almost like t-shirt sizing. You would then be able to go through and look at the group B, which are maybe older, they're not as user-friendly to move, or they're not as able to be moved from an IT perspective and a security perspective. And then you could maybe have group C, like maybe it's a modern app or a more modern app, but there's only 3 people and it's going to cost us $50,000. I think you almost have to put some parameters and requirements around those things, Bryan, so that and decision-making and really closely aligned to the business, because the last thing we want is to have us have a really great concept about, hey, we can move this application from group A into the cloud. It fits our modern architecture and it's going to be fantastic. And then find out that they're planning to decommission it. So I think that working closely to the business, really important, but having those guardrails and shaping parameters for the other applications, because you're either going to keep them and people will have an experience, and you can bubble wrap them, you can do all these different things, or you're going to want to know which ones to move. But before you can know which ones to move, you kind of have to have the groupings.
Yes, very true. You need to know what you have right now. And that's back to the asset management and also your housekeeping, right? So your team really need to know what do you have right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think too, just from your overarching, where do they sit from a risk perspective and from an application, where are they at from a confidentiality, from an integrity? What is that application specific security requirements as you move them? And that will also help you to determine the priority of those applications to move.
Excellent. All right. We're actually getting closer to the panel time. And so I actually have one last question for everyone, every panel speakers. So before we close this panel, what's your last minute thought or departure comment or advice to our audience regarding the security for digital transformation? What's your top advice for tonight? And Bryan, you first.
Great question, Bryan. It's difficult to boil it down to one thing, but the one thing that I do like to talk to security teams about is challenging yourself to try and understand the business goals. And I think it's been touched on a few times tonight, so I don't have to rehash it again, but just this concept of participating as a security team in the larger business in terms of their goals and in terms of their risk profiles and viewing. We all get up every day and we think security and we breathe security, but getting outside of your security silo and actually trying to appreciate what other things are happening. And yes, business goals, yes, operational goals, things that don't necessarily concern security. Viewing it from their lens, to me, is advice that I always give security teams. That's the very high level. Sometimes doing that is a bit of a challenge, but there are really specific things you can do about accomplishing that. But that would be my sort of one-time advice to security team, Bryan.
Excellent. Business language and think about your customer.
Absolutely.
Great. And Ryan, what's your top one?
Top one. So selfish plug, but we're hiring. So if there's anyone out there that is looking to join a digital transformation, you can connect on LinkedIn.
Talent.
Yeah, talent is huge. Yeah, apart from reiterating what Bryan mentioned, again, it's tying it back. It's so important. I can't stress that enough, because it's like saying, like, I want you to build a Ferrari, but what you really need is just a reliable Honda to get you from A to B. And you lose a lot of people when you do that, or you come in and you don't really understand the risk. So, it's really, and I tell myself this, like, you need to understand technically all of that. Like, you have to have a strong technical foundation, but if you cannot parlay that in a way that's easily digestible to somebody on the other side, sometimes that it's a huge limiter. So if you can work on that, that'll help you not only in a digital transformation, but just being able to, capture the attention of somebody else in the business or in finance, to help get your point across. And whether it's securing funding or, saying, like, this is a vulnerability, for example. Like, if you speak in technical, chances are you might lose people that aren't technical, or the business owner or the process owner. So that's my parting words of advice.
Excellent. Really, the needs and it's a fit, right? So it's not like a fancy, it's the fit to the business.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Catherine, what's your?
Yeah, I think, growth mindset. that would be my one comment to share. I think it's in particular, like today, in today's age, with everything evolving, the world is changing, having a growth mindset and being able to continue learning and be open-minded to new ideas and new thinking is very important. I think in security profession, we have no option. This profession is changing. The threat landscape is changing. To the points that Bryan and Ryan said, the businesses are evolving. We have to keep pace. We just can't do that if we don't come forward with a growth mindset. And that to me is a practice. It's not easy because it's hard. You get tired and it's hard to keep learning every day. But I think that it's like, just embrace it, practice every day to come forward with a growth mindset.
Excellent. Yeah, so continuous learning and open-minded, right? So, and security on one side is really interesting. You always have something to learn. It's not like something else you get bored. So there's always new things. So definitely need to catch up with the industry trends. All right, so that's it for all our panel. Thank you very much again for our panelists. And I'd like to ask people online, our panelists come to share their insights, and they spend also their time to give us a share, to talk about all those experience or knowledge or skills. So I'd like to ask everyone, give them a virtual applause or a pat. So thank you very much, our panelists. And also thank you for our people online. So hopefully you get some value from today's session.